All right. So now we'll be understanding what are methods. Methods are basically block of statements which are used to do a specific task, right? So what we generally do in methods is like let's say we have a big task to achieve. What we actually do, we divide that task into different blocks, so that whichever thing that we actually need to execute, we just take the name of that block and we execute that block, right? And same way, whichever is not required, we're not gonna call that thing. So till the time you won't call that block, that will not be executed. So methods are generally used to divide a large code into manageable chunks of code, right? So whichever block of code that you want to call, no matter how many times you want to call it, just call that particular block, and whichever that you don't want to call, you can avoid calling that particular chunk of code, right? So it means like if you remember initially when we get started, so what we were doing, we were actually creating a class, and let's say give this name as learning methods, right? I'll check this public static void, right? Now, if you remember, this thing is also a method, right? Because we were actually writing some piece of code over here, right? Let's say I've written, I was printing something, let's say, hi, how are you? Right. Now, this code is inside a method. This main is basically a method. This is a by default method in Java. Anything that you want to execute has to be present inside this main method. So if I run this, it will actually gonna print this thing, right? Now I can write like 1,000 lines of code over here, right? But if I want to execute it, let's say I've written a program to calculate two numbers, right? Then I've written some other piece of code. Then I again want to write, execute the calculation of the program, the addition of the same thing. So what I need to do, I again need to write the same piece of information again, right? So n number of time, if I want to execute the addition, I actually need to write the same piece of code again, because I am inside one main method, and whatever that I write inside this method, that will be executed. And let's say if I want to comment, if I don't want to execute any piece of block, then I have to comment it either by writing double backslash or by writing this comment block against that particular statement, right? So in any ways, all the code that I'm going to write will be inside one method only, right? So the better approach of handling these things are to create methods. That is why the methods are being implemented, right? There are some syntax. There are some declaration of method, that is a very important thing. So these are the six mandatory items for a method. Whenever you are creating a method, whenever you're declaring a method, right? There has to be an access modifier, right? Now, what are access modifiers? What are return types? The method name, the parameter list, right? The method body, the start of the method and the end of the method, right? So what are these things? We'll gonna take a look at this and this particular lecture, right? Now let us declare a method over here. Let us go back to Eclipse and let us create some methods to get a better understanding. So let's see how to declare a method. Let's say I create a method that should display something, right? So let's say how we declare at the body of a method. So I first write public void and then display, right? And then these are the brackets, and then we have uh, the open curly braces and the closed curly braces. So this is basically the body of a method. So if we talk what we have just done, we have basically declare a method, right? we have declare a method, right? Now declaring a method as in we declare some variables. Let's say I declare a variable like this. So this is like declaration of a variable, and then I initialize this variable with some values, right? But we cannot initialize a method. We can declare a method and then we actually define this method, right? Now, if we write this much only, it means that I have just declared a method. I have not yet defined a method. It means that if you actually call this method, it will still gonna be executed, right? It will not gonna throw any error, but nothing will be executed because we have not written anything inside the body of this method. So anything that we need to define, all definitions will uh, come here. Like all definitions goes here, right? Now, before we start defining anything, we first need to understand what is this public, what is this void, right? What are these things? What these things actually tell us, right? So we first need to understand. We have just written a syntax of a method, right? Now, what all these things are doing, these are very important to know. Now, if you take a look over here, we actually discussed these are the six mandatory things that needs to be implemented when we are creating a method, right? Now, I cannot change the sequence, the way these things are defined. I cannot change the sequence. It means I cannot remove this public from here and just write it over here. This will not gonna work. See, the compiler is actually throwing some error, right? So I cannot change the sequence. The sequence has to be like this only, right? But what is this public? These are basically access modifiers, right? Now, what are access modifiers? We have a detailed discussion about access modifiers in our upcoming lectures, right? For the time being, like public this actually define the visibility of this method, right? So this public, it could be public, it could be private, it could be protected, it could be default. There are a number of access modifiers available, right? For today, we are not going to discuss about access modifiers, right? So just take it as it is for the time being, and till we proceed with our lectures, so these things will be very much clear to you. Now, the next thing over here is basically the return type. So we're going to talk about what return type is, why the return type is required to a method, right? Then the third thing is the method name, and the fourth one is the parameter list. And finally, we have a method body that starts with the open curly braces and ends with the close curly braces, and whatever code that you're gonna write will be inside this curly braces only. Now let's understand these things. So the very first thing, public, we are not going to talk about this right now. We'll just take it as it is for the day, right? This is access modifiers. We'll be studying it in the coming lectures. Now, second thing, what is this? This is basically the return type, right? Now, this will define what this method will actually gonna return, right? So, return in the sense, if we are talking about a return type, then it should actually gonna return some data type value, right? Data type of the value returned by the method. This is basically right. So it could be any data type, right? It could now this method could return integer value. If it is returning an integer value, I actually need to write int over here. If this method is giving us a string value, then I need to write string over here. If this is returning a character value, then I need to give the character data type over here. So this thing is basically a return type, and if we are defining any return type with the method, then you can see the compiler is basically giving us some error, right? Because we need to add another keyword that says return. Whenever we are defining a return type to a method, we need to add a keyword that is return. So if you mouse over onto this display method, you can see that this method must return a result of the type int. So what I need to do, I actually need to write this keyword return inside this method block, and I need to return a value that matches this data type, right? So if the data type is int over here, so I'll be returning the integer value only, right? And then the error will go away. I cannot return any string value over here if the data type is integer. If the data type is string, then I can return the value string. So whatever data type the return type of this method is, the same value you actually need to return from this method. So either you can hard code this value, or you can store it inside some variable x equal to hello, and you can return this variable over here like this, right? But it has to be of the same data type. So a return statement must be the last statement of this method, right? So if this method is returning something, so that has to be returned using this return statement, and this should be the last statement of this block. I cannot write this thing just above this, right? It will gonna throw me an error. Even let's say I cannot write it like this, the compiler will actually gonna throw an error. It says unreachable code, right? So this has to be the last statement of this method, right? Now it's not mandatory that every method should return you something, right? If you don't want to return anything from a method, so you can you should not write this return statement. And if you are not writing this, if you're not returning anything, then the method should be void, right? So if the method is void, you can execute anything from the method. Let's say this method prints only display inside the display method. So I'll just gonna write system.out.println inside and display method, right? So I'm just printing this statement. In this case, there is no need to return anything. And again, it doesn't mean that if the method is not returning anything, so you should think that we should not write anything over here, right? Either there should be a void method, or it should be a non-void method, but with some return type or with some data type, right? So if the method is not returning anything, so there should be a void method. So let us recap what we have seen so far in like when we are talking about method return type. So it may be possible that a method return a value, or it does not returns any value, right? So return type of a method is nothing but the data type of the value returned by the method. For example, if a method returns integer, the return type should be integer. If it returns float, the return type should be float. For character, boolean, and so on, right? And if a method does not have any return type, then that method should be a void method, right? And if a method is returning a value, then the last statement of the method should be a return statement, and any code after the return statement is not reachable. So you should not write any other statement after the return statement. It has to be the last statement of that method.